What's up guys, my name is Julie and this is the Curated Curvy, where I bring you along for the journey as I attempt to create the curated wardrobe of my dreams with these two hands. And today I have for you all a So Vintage member video. So first and foremost, long time no chat. I know. Stay tuned for the next video where I get into all the details about that. But for today, this video is in collaboration with Rochelle of Rochelle Handmade Designs. She decided that for the month of November, she would sew only vintage patterns spanning from, I believe, the 1970s to about the, I don't remember, but I'll put it up on the screen for you. She has been sewing up all the vintage patterns on her channel, so do go check her out. There are also a few other people that she included on this vlog tour of So Vintage Vember. I will be sure to list the hashtag in the description box below so that you can check their videos out as well. Before I begin, let us give Rochelle her proper due. Rochelle is a content creator here on YouTube. She is the type of content creator I aspire to be. She is consistent, she is interesting, and she is always innovating. If you have not heard of her, I will have her channel linked in the description box below. Do go check her out, as she is lovely and I consider her to be one of my internet friends. Now, without further ado, for my installment of So Vintage Vember, I hope I'm saying that right. But for my installment of So Vintage Vember, I chose an authentic vintage pattern, which was Simplicity 2580. Let me grab it so I can show you. This is, oop, there we go. This is the pattern in all of its glory. It is Simplicity 2580. I believe this pattern was copyrighted in 1958, and this was actually given to me by a friend of a friend. I was attending a birthday party for one of my daughter's friends, and you know, as moms do, we're chatting it up, talking about hobbies and things that we enjoy. And I was telling her that I am really into sewing my own clothing, and she told me that her mother was a seamstress and she had all these vintage patterns left over that she didn't know what to do, so she gave me them. In fact, I have an entire bag of them that I have yet to go through. So this challenge was the perfect motivation to get into that bag and pull out a pattern and get something sewn up. For this project, I went ahead and I sewed this view here, which is view 1. It features sort of like a lapel collar, a included tie bow. It has these cute little cuff sleeves and a very full skirt, which is quintessential for those 1950s patterns. Going into this, I was quite fearful. I tend to stick within the 70s and the 80s for vintage patterns, and I know that's not super vintage, and the 80s for a lot of people is kind of like an eye roll vintage, but that seems to be my era. I am an 80s baby through and through. Even though I was only there for about a month, I was there and I feel it. I feel it in here. So usually when I'm sewing vintage patterns, I tend to sew the 80s and the early 90s. So I've never really gone as far back as 1958. I'm pretty sure of that. Going into it, one of my apprehensions was that I know that the way that women were shaped back then was so different. And also, even in the 50s, a lot of that shaping came through undergarments that are just not as prevalent today. Things that we don't wear, we don't really care about anymore, so to speak. I tend to shy away from patterns like this just because I always fear that what I'm going to get in real life is going to differ wildly from what I see on the pattern envelope, and that can be very, very disheartening. But Rochelle put out the challenge. I wanted to rise to the occasion, and I had all these patterns in my home already, so I went ahead and I grabbed this one. I have to say I was pleasantly surprised, but before we get into the fit, let's go over some of the details of the pattern. So as I already stated, this pattern is Simplicity 2580. It was copyrighted in 1958, and the pattern envelope that I have came in a size 20, which according to the pattern would be a bust of 40. Now, one thing that the Big Four has always been infamous about, it seems to be, is too much ease, and so I am 1000% a bust of 44. However, I made no adjustments to the size of this pattern with the exception of the sleeves. Pause, we'll talk about that later. I was able to sew it up using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and it fits really nicely across the bust, if I must say so myself. The pattern is also forgiving in that it has gathers along the waistline, so that gave me a little bit more wiggle room. It ended up being actually pretty loose on me, like not form fitted at all, so I could have taken in those gathers more, but I was a bit apprehensive because I knew that there was one step that I was not going to include in the pattern. The pattern measurements is a size 20, which would be a bust of 40. Let's see, a waist of 32 and a hip of 42. I'm a bust of 44. I am a waist of 37 and I am a hip of 47. So still making no real adjustments to the pattern, I was able to fit into it quite seamlessly. The one thing that I did have to adjust in terms of the pattern was the sleeve. So as I aforementioned, I sewed the bodice at a 1/2 inch seam allowance to give me an extra bit of ease because I know that I am not the size that the pattern is calling for. With the sleeves, I sewed them at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance because I felt like the 1/2 inch was still a little bit tight. And now I feel like I have a nice range of motion with the sleeve, and it just fits really, really nicely. So that was a quick fix. That was a simple fix. Another adjustment that I made to the pattern, which I tend to make to most patterns nowadays, is the waist. So at the fold line, I folded it up 1 inch, which in total would be about 2 inches. So I took 2 inches off of the length of the bodice. So it hits me right here, which is pretty perfect for my body shape, because if I bend to the side, this is my waist. Most patterns in general have your waist like a lot lower, but usually if you're curvy, your waistline tends to be a little bit higher. So I like to make that adjustment in my patterns to account for that. So I did that to the patterns, to the front and back piece, and then I also made sure to do it to the facing piece so that everything would fit together nicely, and it is the perfect adjustment for me. As you can see, it sits right at my waist, and it frames my body really, really nicely. You can also see here what I was talking about it still being loose. Like, there's still a good bit of ease in this. Yeah, so just something to be noted, you know, even if you're like not exactly the size that the pattern envelope is calling for, play around with those seam allowances, try it out anyway, be better than me, do a mock-up. I did not, but I tend to know like how my body fits into things these days. And so the mock-up phase is just like if it's absolutely, absolutely necessary. Moving on. The fabric that I chose for this pattern is a quilting cotton that I picked up from Joann's. It is in this gorgeous floral print. I had always planned to do the 2 tones. Originally, I was going to make the actual collar stand and the little lapel the same as the bow fabric, but then I figured that would just be too busy on the top. So I went for the main body and one fabric and then putting the contrast in the cuffs and here. This is a tiny, tiny gingham. Are we gonna focus? There we go. This is a tiny gingham print that I had in my stash. This is also a cotton, but it's a much softer cotton, a much looser woven cotton that I picked up from the warehouse fabrics where I live. And so that is what I went with for the contrast of the tie as well as the cuffs. And I feel like it's just enough interest, but it's not too much. It doesn't feel tacky and it doesn't feel overwhelming. Originally, as I stated, I was going to go with a different print for this. I actually have an example sneak peek, but I was going to use this print for the tie and the cuffs, and when I held them together I felt like it would be too busy, and the patterns, even though they looked good in the store, when I was looking at them lying flat, I felt like the patterns were clashing with each other. So I messaged my little sister and I showed her what I was thinking, and she agreed with me, and then she told me to try and find a gingham, and she was spot on. She was absolutely spot on. So I really, really love this combination. I feel like it adds a little bit of interest to the dress. And I try to imagine the dress without it, because I'm sure that I'm gonna sew up this bodice again because it's so good. But I try to imagine the dress without it and I just can't see it. Like, I think this is perfection. Like, this is as close as you get to like perfection and print mixing. I feel like it's just done in a really cool way, even though this maroon color, we're gonna focus. There we go. Even though this maroon color does not show up at all in the dress, for some reason the two just work together and they work really well. So I'm very happy about that. So again, this is a quilting cotton from Joann's, and this is a cotton gingham that I picked up from a fabric store that's local to me. Constructing this dress, I think one, it took like 3 days, but that's because I'm working again, so I was only sewing at night. If I had like a day dedicated to sewing, I could knock this dress out in 1 day. Absolutely no problem at all. But it took like multiple nights, like I said, because I'm working, so I only had a few hours here and there. The construction was pretty seamless. I did change a few things. So the first thing that I changed, as I said, was I shortened the bodice by 2 inches, which meant that I also shortened the facing by 2 inches, just so that it sits where I like my dresses to fall. The next thing that I changed was that the pattern calls for a side zipper. I omitted that because I don't really like side zippers, and knowing that there's a button placket in the front here, I felt like I could pull this dress on over my head. It's also not an extremely fitted dress to where I'd have an issue getting it over my head. The sleeves are a little bit tight, so I have to be careful if I'm wearing makeup getting it on and off, but apart from that, it comes on and it comes off pretty seamlessly. So I did not include the side zipper in the construction of the dress, which meant that I could just gather all the skirt panels and attach them pretty easily, and the same with the top. Like I said, the construction process for the most part was pretty easy. The thing that got me was this freaking collar. When it came to sewing the collar, there was a point where I thought that I probably wasn't going to finish this dress, that I was just going to have to throw it in the bin and start over from a new pattern because I could not figure out how to get it. I must have sewn and re-sewn it at least 5 times before it made sense to me. There were some snipping lines, and the lines were, the depth of the snip was different on the facing piece versus the actual collar piece. And I thought that I knew better than the pattern. So I went ahead and I snipped the actual collar piece down maybe like an extra 1/2 inch, and that turned out to be a really big mistake. I was able to just sew like a really tight zigzag stitch, almost like a satin stitch across that snipping part to close it back up, and then just keep playing with the collar. I just kept playing with it and kept playing with it, sewing basting stitches until I was able to sew it in a manner that when I flipped it right side out, it laid flat. Steam works wonders. So this is what the collar looks like pressed out and laid flat, and it looks pretty good. One thing I will say, and I tell people this all the time, especially new seamstress, is that a busy print will hide a multitude of sins. If you are new, don't go with like a solid print, because every little mistake that you make is going to be on Front Street. So I knew that when I was picking up my fabric, I had that in mind, which is why I chose a Ditsy floral, but it helps a lot on places like the collar where you can't see that is actually not that perfect and there is some puckering here, but to your untrained eye, it looks pretty good. I think this is the side where I messed up on. So you see it's a lot deeper of a notch there than it is here. But again, a busy print will hide a multitude of sins. So that was the toughest part of construction for me. The collar is really cool. One thing that I love about vintage patterns, I've sewn some vintage reproduction patterns, is the insides and the care that they put into it almost makes it to where you don't have to try to have a pretty inside of your garment. So the collar facing and the lapel here is all one piece. So it spans the entire like neckline of the dress, and when you look on the inside, it just looks so seamless and so well finished. I so admire that. So it really is beautiful, and it came together really nicely. I actually plan on sewing this again as a top, and I don't really remember what I did to make it successful, so I'll probably run into the same problems. The other part of the construction was the sleeves and this cuff here, which was pretty simple. So the pattern would have you to attach the cuff like right sides together, then use a piece of bias binding to finish that sleeve, press it down, fold it up however you want it. I didn't do that. I literally just attached it and then I serged it, and I knew that I was always going to wear it down like this, so I didn't feel like there was a need to like bias bind it or try and make it look all fancy. I'm not like a pretty insides girl. Some of my favorite online seamsters are also like people who put a lot of care and attention into the way the inside of their garment looks. I'm not that girl. Just let's get it done. As long as it looks good on the outside, as long as it fits, I'm pretty good to go. So I didn't feel like I wanted to do the bias binding and all of that. So that was the construction of the shirt, or excuse me, the bodice, the collar, and the sleeve. For the skirt, it was pretty simple. It's just a giant rectangle. It's 3 giant rectangles came together and gathered. You gather them down, you fit it on the waistline, you match up your notches, and you're good to go. The only thing that I did, ultimately, I think I took up about a 3-inch, I know I took up a 3-inch hem. I don't remember what the pattern called for. Originally, I had a 1-inch hem, and it was still a little bit too long for my liking. So I folded it up, and then what I did was let's see if we'll catch it. Focus. Okay, so I sewed a bunch of lines through the hem of the dress to make it stiffer, just so that it falls nicely and it has like a really nice like kind of shaping around the hem of the dress. I like that it's a little bit stiffer down there. This is something that I've done before with my other dresses, just to make the hem of the dress look a bit more substantial, almost like I have a hem facing even though I don't. And that was not included in the pattern. That was just something that I did on my own because again, I wanted that hem to be like refined. Trying to think, is there anything else about the dress? How does the pattern fit? So in terms of the fit, I do like it. Like I said, it is a little bit roomy, surprisingly. Like it kind of hangs away from the body. I think that's a good thing though. I went back and forth about adding a belt, so I just tied some fabric around my waist in this color, and I didn't like it. I felt like it was just, I don't know, there wasn't enough space between the prints to kind of let each print breathe, so I didn't go with that option. And then I thought about making a belt out of the main body fabric, which I have enough of, and I like that more, but it wasn't something that I was like super attached to. Like I felt the same about it with a belt or without a belt. Thought about adding ties so that I would have the option to cinch it in at the waist if I wanted to, but I also didn't go with that option. Ultimately, I chose to just leave it. It fits really comfortably. It fits really roomy. It's something I can have a good meal in and be okay. And if I decide in the future that I do want it a little bit more cinched, then I can always go back and add those ties later. But as for right now, this is the fit. So I do like it. I'm very happy with how the sleeves fit. The sleeves also have 2 darts in them, which helps a ton. It's like those things that we don't include in modern patterns anymore for some reason that just kind of get me sometimes, because with a fitted sleeve like this, my range of motion is still so good, and I so appreciate that. So yeah, I like the fit of the pattern. The sleeves also were supposed to be eased in. Busy print has a multitude of sins. They're not eased in very well at all. There are definitely some gathers along there, but it's not something I care about. Also, I need to bring up the shoulder, which is an adjustment that I usually have to make, and I thought about making it and then I was just lazy, so I didn't. But the shoulders need to come up about 1 inch, because right now it sits kind of like on the curve of my shoulder and not like on my shoulder, But busy print has a multitude of sins. You can't even really tell. So that's fine. Like I said, all in all, I do like the fit. I kind of am going back and forth between whether it's too loose and relaxed. It doesn't have that cinched like waist that's kind of so quintessential for like those 50s patterns, but I still like the fit, and it is really, really comfortable to wear. And for that reason alone, I kind of just want to leave it alone. Maybe I'll make a belt and then I can add it or not add it if I want to, because I also feel like if I added ties, it would just change the way that the dress looks altogether. Will I make the pattern again? I definitely plan on making the pattern again, but as a top. When I was originally working on the pattern and I had finally finished constructing the top, even though, fun fact, the top is not done because I haven't put in buttons yet, so it's just being held together by a pin right now. I'll add the buttons later. But when I was finally done constructing the top, I tried it on and I took a little snapshot and I posted it to Instagram, and I really, really like the way that it looks as a top. I think this would be the cutest like cropped button-up top, even like with the tie and the contrasting sleeves. So I do plan on making it again as a top. As a dress, if I were to make it again, I think I would tweak the length of the skirt. Right now we're like in fall, we're getting ready to go into winter in a good bit of weeks, and so I'm not in a rush to like chop off the bottom of the skirt, but I think that this dress would suit my style more if it was a little bit shorter. But that's just like me nitpicking. I do like it a lot. And lastly, would I recommend this pattern? Yes. I mean, if you can find it, you should absolutely buy it. I searched it up on eBay and I saw a few of them on sale, anywhere from like $10 to $18. I think it's a good pattern. I definitely think it's worth it. It's one that I do want to keep playing around with, specifically the top portion of the pattern, and make again. So that is my installment for Sew Vintage Vember. If you enjoy seeing me sew up vintage patterns, go ahead and check out this video, and I'll see you next time.